Okay, y'all see I got my glasses on today. That means it's something important. So what's up, y'all? Today we're gonna start something new. We're gonna be reading this book. We're gonna read in chapters. I don't know if this book got chapters, so we're probably gonna read like 10 pages today. But got my glasses on. Got my food for lunch. But yeah, let's get started. You know what I mean? So the book is called Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. I hope I did, but if I didn't, I'm sorry. We're gonna take the cover off because cover keep on slipping off. Yeah. Alright. I already read a little bit of this, but let me just stop talking. There shouldn't be any monsters left in Lucille. I think that's what her town is called. The city used to have them, of course. What city didn't? They used to be everywhere, thick in the air and offices in the street and in people's own houses. They used to be the police and teachers and judges and even the mayor. Yeah, the mayor used to be a monster. Lucille has a different mayor now. This mayor is an angel. The last couple of mayors have been all angels. Not like from heaven, not quite real type of angel, but from and behind and in front of the revolution. Therefore, very real type of angel. It was the angels who took apart the prisoners and the police who held councils prosecuting the former officers who had shot children and people and murdered people, sentencing them to restitution and rehabilitation. Many people thought it wasn't enough, but the angels were only human, and it's hard to build a new world without making people angry. You try your best, you move with compassion, you think about the big structures. No revolution is perfect. In the meantime, the angels banned firearms, not just because of the school shootings, but also because of the kids who shot themselves and their families at home. The civilians who thought they could shoot people who didn't look like them just because they got mad or scared or whatever. And nothing would happen to them because the old law liked them better than the dead. The angels took the laws and changed them, tore down those horrible statues of rich men who'd owned people and fought to keep owning people. The angels believed that the people agreed that there was a good amount of proper and deserved shame in history. And some things were just never going to be things to be proud of. Instead, they put up monuments. Some were statues of the dead, mostly the children whose hashtags have been turned into battle cries during the revolution. Others were giant sculptures with thousands of names carved into them, because too many people had died if you made statues of everyone. The lookout would be filled with stone figures, and there'd be no room for the alive ones. The names were of people who died when the hurricanes hit, and the monsters who wouldn't evacuate the prisons or send aid. People who died when the monsters sent drones and bombs to their countries. Because as the angels poured out, you shouldn't use a nation as a basis to choose which death you mourn. Aren't even real. People who died because of the monsters took away their health care, names of people, and countless letters recording they have been. The citizens of Lucille put dozens of white candles at the base of each monument, hung layers of marigold necklaces around the neck of statues. When they walked past, they would often fall silent for a moment and press a palm against the stone, soaking up the heat the sun had left in it, remembering the souls the stone was holding. They'd remember the marches and vigils, vigils. I don't know. I'm sorry. The shaky footage that was splashed everywhere of their deaths, a thing that wasn't allowed anymore. That gruesome dissemination of someone's child gasping in their final moments, bubbling air or blood or grief. The angels respected the dead and their loved ones. The people of Lusal would remember the temples that were bombed and the acid attacks. The synagogues remembering was important. Jam was born after the monsters bored and raised Lusal, but everyone else she remembered, it was taught in school how monsters had attained power for such a long time, how the angels had removed them, making Lusal what it is today. It wasn't like the angels wanted to be painted as heroes, but the teacher wanted the kids to want to be angels, you see. Angels could change the world, and Lusal was proud. Jam was fascinated by them, by the stories. All right, now I'm going to take the eating break. Some better lighting right there. All right. Covers, even though Ube hadn't said she said again. I think we on the wrong. I think we on the wrong. The teachers told in history class, they briefly mentioned other angels, those who weren't humans, but only to say that Lusal's angels had been named after these other ones. When JM asked for more information, her teacher's eyes slid away. They mentioned religious books, but the reluctance that not wanting to influence the children. Religion had caused so many problems before the revolution, people were hesitant to talk about it now. If you really want to know, one of the teachers added, taking pity on James' frustrated curiosity. There's always the library. Why can't they just tell me? Jam complained to her best friend, Redemption, as they left school. Her best friend is named Redemption. I worded that wrong, sorry. Smiled at her, annoyed at her annoyance. It was the last day of class is before summer break, and while he was excited to do nothing for the next several weeks except train, Jam was as always on some hunt for information. You're giving yourself homework, he pointed out. Aren't you curious? She replied. Who the old angels were, if they were even real, you mean. Redemption adjusted the strap of his backpack. You know, that's what a lot of religion was, right? Just made up things used to scare people so they control us better. Jam frowned. Maybe, she said, but I still wouldn't know. Redemption threw an arm around her. You wouldn't be you if you didn't, he laughed. You gotta go pick up the little bro from his class and walk him home. But let me know what you find out, okay? Okay, she hugged him goodbye. Give Moss a kiss for me, he scoffed. I'll try, but that boy thinks he's grown now. Too grown for kisses? That's what I said. Redemption threw up his hands as he headed off. Talk soon, love you. Are they boyfriend and girlfriend or just friends? I don't know. Love you, Jam waved goodbye and watched him break into a jog, his body moving with an easy grace. Then she went to the library to look up pictures of angels. The librarian was a tall, dark-skinned man who whizzed around the marble floors in his wheelchair. His name was Ube, and Jam had known him since she was a toddler, pawing through picture books. She loved being in the library, the almost sacred silence you could find there. It felt like another home. Uwe smiled at her when she walked in, and Jam took an index card from his quarter, writing her question about the angels down on it. She slid it over to Uwe, and he grunted as he read it, nodded his head, and then he wrote some reference numbers underneath her question and slid the card back to her. Then they didn't notice, they didn't need to talk, which was perfect. It took her 15 minutes to find old pictures printed on thin, flaky paper and nested between the heavy hook. All right. Covers. Even though Uwe hadn't said she should, Jam considered pulling on the white gloves nested in, oh, I got a notification. Sorry, guys. Nestled in the reading desk drawers to use looking through the books. They seemed that old, but they weren't in the protected section. So she figured it was fine to run her bare fingers over the smooth and fragile paper. The room she was in was quiet, with large windows vaulting up the walls and domed skylights pouring in late afternoon sun. Jam sat for a few minutes with her fingers on the images, staring down, turning a page and staring at the next one. They were strong and confusing pictures. Eventually, she closed and stacked the books, then lugged them into the checkout counter. Ube raised a thick black eyebrow at her. All of these? He asked. His voice sounded unreal, deep and velvet, something that would live only on in a radio because it didn't make sense outside of in normal air. Jim nodded. You gotta be careful with them, you know? They're mad old. She nodded again, and Ube looked at her for a moment, then smiled, shaking his head. You right. You're a careful girl, always seeing it. He scanned the books as he smoked. You treat the books gentle, like they flowers or something. She blushed. Don't be shy about it. Books are important. He stamped them for her feet. You need a bag, baby? Jim shook her head no. All right now. 2 weeks, remember? She heft the books into her hip, nodded and left. There were a weight straining against her arm. Until she got home, she took them straight upstairs to her mother's studio. Jam's mother had been born when there were monsters, and Jam's grandmother had come from the islands, a woman entirely too gentle for that time. It had hurt her too much to be alive then, hurt even more to give birth to Jam's mother, whose existence was the result of monsters monstering. This grandmother had soon died after birth, not before Jam's mother bitter. This grandmother had died soon after birth, but not before naming James' mother bitter. That's cruel. Naming your own child bitter, that's crazy. Anyways, no one had argued with the dying woman. Bitter knew her name was heavy, but she hadn't minded it because it was honest. That was something she taught Jam, that a lot of things were manageable as long as they were honest. You could see things clearly. Ooh, excuse me. If they were honest, you could decide what to do next because you knew exactly what you were dealing with. She lied to Jam, always told her the truth, even if sometimes she couldn't make it as gentle as she would have wanted for her daughters. Alright, eating break. Hold on, guys. Alright, guys, it's the last 3 pages. Alright. But Jam trusted her mother for those brutal truths. And that's why home was the first place she brought the books with the angels in them. Her mother was painting when Jam came in, so the studio was full of loud music. Old school grime this time, the energy thumping against the light and Storm Ashley's voice whispering around Bitter's flying braids. Jam put the books down on a table that wasn't too crowded and leaned her elbows on them, watching her mother's shoulder blades jerk and convulse as she moved on her hands and knees. A massive canvas stretched beneath her. Bitter was clutching a brush between her fingers, her joints locked in angles that looked painful, her eyes partially closed and her mouth slightly open. She always painted like this, half dancing in something of a trance. She was always exhausted afterwards. Jam didn't want to interrupt her. Jam's father, Alo, was the one who was always at getting through his wife when she was working. It was something about his vibe. Jim thought. Something about how attuned they were to each other. All Alo had to do was be close enough to Bitter. He crouched a few feet away from the edge of her canvas and just wait, breathing as he did, steady and calm. Jim had watched it many times, the way her mother's hands would slow down, the brushstrokes growing softer, shorter, and eventually how Bitter would stop moving altogether. Her her shoulders setting like a bird landing and floating on its wings. Her long neck would curve back, raising her face, and she'd look straight at Alo, but her smile would be like a whole new day starting. Jim crawled under the table and curled up on a blanket that had been there. It was getting harder to fit into the small places she liked to hide in. Her arms and her legs were getting longer from her growth spurts, and she was almost as tall as Bitter now. Her ankles flopped against the hardwood, and she bent her arms onto a pillow under her head and slept. The bass from the music drumming into her bones through the floor. It felt like only a few minutes before her mother's hand drifted against her cheek. Jam, wake up, sweetness. She blinked, and Bitter's face came into focus. A piece at the at dude, I cannot talk today. A piece at a time. The hard cheekbones, the bare eyebrows, and the broad mouth pressed against the matte red. Her mother's teeth spread onto view as she smiled, jam sharp and white. The music had stopped. Welcome back, child, Bitter said. Stand up. Jam took her mother's hand and pulled herself out, avoiding the edge of the table. She knocked her head against it way too many times before. How long have you been under there for? Jim shrugged, and her mother brushed her imaginary dirt off her hair. Bitter's face was smudged with a couple of different. All right, last page, guys. A couple of different white paints. A bright white that seemed holy, a duller, slightly yellowed ivory, as if a magical touch had touched her forehead. A cream tailing dry and broken down her neck. Painting, Jam asked. Bitter was one of the painting, Jam asked. Bitter was one of the few people she voiced with. Come see. They walked over and Jim leaned forward to look at the painting. It was many white and thick textured paint climbing on itself as if it wanted to get away from the canvas. Also from the floor underneath the canvas. They were raked gouges in it. Next to dedicate vein imprints. Next to pieces of Bitter's palm. Something large and loud in the center of the painting had the hind legs of a goat, fur like grated bone, solid thighs, their surface thrusting toward the ceiling of the studio. Jim pointed at it and looked at her mother. Bitter held her calm, thoughtful. I'm not sure, the thing just coming out of the way it wants so. Wait, what? I'm not sure, the thing just coming out of the way it wants so. Its arms were long, even longer than Jim's. It didn't have a head yet. The smoke Bitter had painted around it as dense as clouds, and Jim thought she could see it move. Bro. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. It was as dense as clouds, and Jam thought she could see it move. A jerky tendril here and there. Name, she asked. Bitter shrugged. You could name something when you're not sure what it is. They stood and looked down together at the thing struggling out of smoke. It's just waiting sometimes. Bitter murmured. Just waiting. Jam wasn't sure if she meant that she was waiting for the thing to show itself, or if the thing itself was waiting for better to be done, making it. Maybe they were one and the same. She took her mother's hand and pulled her toward the angel's books. Ah, said Bitter. What have you done? Jam flipped some of the books open to the pages while she ducked the glitter bookmarks Redemption gave her on her last birthday. She pushed the books out across the table so her mother could see the pictures in each of them. They were supposed to be angels, but they were terrifying eyes filled with licking flames, even though as they looked out from the page, armored faces that weren't faces, wings full of mouths, wheels of reddened eyes, four-headed forms that weren't even vaguely human. There was a butchered lion head bleeding somewhere in there. Bitter hummed at Bitter hummed in touching the pictures. Jim looked up at her angels. Jim looked up at her angels. Bitter hummed some more and nodded. Jim frowned, but Lou saw the mayor and the council and everyone who came together to take away the monsters. Those were angels, not these, she signed. Her mother ran her stained fingers across the books. Do not be afraid, she said. Jim didn't understand, so she kept the frown on her face. Alright guys, that's 11 pages today. Yeah. Guys, let me know if you wanna you want some, parts to this. I can if you guys want. I'll just say it down in the comments, and for now, that's about it. Bye guys.